Well, people seem to like the last of these unscripted videos, so let's make another one, why the hell not? So, a few years ago, a fan theory started circulating that got a surprising amount of traction, which basically suggested that Sigismund and, by extension, all of the Black Templars were not descended from Imperial Fist stock, and that they were in actuality descended from one of the Lost Legions. Now, I've been getting quite a few requests to do an in-depth theory video on this topic, but I'm going to say out right now, this video is the closest you're going to get to that. Why? Because quite frankly, I don't think that particular theory holds any water. Personally, I think it's an extremely weak theory, and trust me, this is coming from someone who's done quite a few weak theories in their own time, you know what I'm saying? Now, I do want to point out that this video is not a personal attack on the person who came up with said theory, it's just me explaining as to why I personally won't be doing an in-depth theory video on this video topic, if that makes sense. So, the main piece of supporting evidence for this particular theory comes from an interaction between Dawn and Sigismund during the Horus Heresy, where Dawn turned around and said to Sigismund, like, "You are not my son," or "I am not your father." I can't remember the exact quote off the top of my head, but it's something to that effect. And a few people start taking that extremely literally because, in their words, Dawn was a very literal person. And the only other piece of potential supporting evidence to this theory, apart from, Sigismund not being Dawn's son, comes from the story Chamber at the End of Memory, where it's implied that the warriors of the Lost Legions were integrated into the ranks of the Ultramarines and Imperial Fist respectively. That's basically your evidence. There may be other pieces of potential evidence to support this theory, but these are the main two that I've seen floating around. Now, the reason why I think this is a particularly weak theory is, quite frankly, there is a hell of a lot more to debunk this than there is to support it. The first of which, minor spoilers for the Sigismund novel, is that when Sigismund was inducted into the ranks of the Legione Astartes, remember that Sigismund himself was one of the original Terran recruits into the Legions, Sigismund, after undergoing his physical and mental evaluation, was determined that he would be a best fit for Category 7, i.e. the 7th Legion, the Imperial Fists. And yes, while it is true he was considered to be a potential candidate for some other legions as well, these legions in question were neither the 2nd or the 11th. They were the 12th, the 16th, and the 19th, the World Eaters, the Lunar Wolves, and the Raven Guard. Now, some of you may think, why the Raven Guard? Well, remember at that point in time the Raven Guard were designed to be terror troops, and Sigismund himself was shown to be extremely aggressive, which is also why he was also deemed to be a good fit for the World Eaters as well. So Sigismund's own book flat out states that he was inducted into the 7th Legion. Secondly, Rogal Dorn telling Sigismund that he was not his son. This was not something to be taken literally. It's basically one of those instances you get in a TV show, like a drama or something, where someone does something so heinous and unforgivable that their parents turn around and say, "I have no son." They basically, it's an act of disowning. It's not to be taken literal, and if Dawn is to be taken literal in this instance, then what Dawn is saying is that I am not your dad because I did not impregnate your mother. If he's being literal, that's what he means. And remember, Dawn disowned Sigismund at that particular point because Sigismund was disobeying his orders and turning into a religious nutjob. So Dawn was pissed off. That's why he disowned him. And even then, during the Siege of Terra novels, Dawn basically turns around and says, I don't agree with you becoming a religious nutjob, but you're still my son, and we have to do this, let's put all this shit behind us. And even refers to Sigismund as his son multiple times in those books. Thirdly, the Templar Brotherhood, i.e. the inspiration for the Black Templars. The Templar Brotherhood was part of the Imperial Fist very early on, not necessarily during their earliest days, but it was certainly a thing when Dawn took over, because the Templar Brotherhood guarded the innermost sanctums of the Phalanx. And we know for certain that multiple successor chapters did take on names and heraldry of organisational elements or chapters within their respective legions. One of the most prominent being that within the Blood Angels, because the 9th chapter of the Blood Angels was known as the Angels Vermilion. And lo and behold, what was one of the second founding chapters of the Blood Angels called? The Angels Vermilion. You had the Raptors, who were largely implied to be named after the Raptors of the Raven Guard, even though it's not explicitly confirmed, but it's very much on the head, like wink wink nudge nudge, say no more kind of thing. Now, the fourth piece of evidence that goes against this fan theory is, quite frankly, the gene seed flaws of the Black Templars themselves. The Black Templars have a gene seed flaw which results in them being unable to develop the Betcher's gland and Susan membrane. Gene seed flaw which is also shared by the modern day Imperial Fist chapter. Now yes, the Imperial Fists were completely wiped out during the War of the Beast and were rebuilt in part using Black Templars genetic material, as well as material taken from the Excoriators, the Fists Exemplar, the Crimson Fists, and so on. Now while you could potentially argue how the Imperial Fists got their gene seed flaws from the influx of Black Templars gene seed, this doesn't explain how the Crimson Fists also share the exact same genetic flaws, i.e. missing Betcher's gland, missing Susan membrane. Because quite frankly, the odds of two entirely different genetic lineages sporting the exact same genetic flaws are astronomically low. Now yes, the Imperial Fists missing a Betcher's gland is also shared by the Raven Guard, but that is the only genetic similarity between the two. Imperial Fists lack a Susan membrane, Raven Guard have a Susan membrane, but lack the muconoid organ which the Imperial Fists have. Not to mention the fact that the Raven Guard also have deficient melanchromic organs, and their gene seed is quite frankly so fucked that they have to use their purest stocks from Terra to make new recruits prior to the advent of Primaris Marines. So personally, I think this entire fan theory came about purely because someone had misinterpreted a certain piece of text or simply took it far too literally. Because quite frankly, the evidence against this theory far outweighs the evidence for that supports it. Now, as mentioned earlier, it was implied within the story chamber at the end of Memory that the Lost Legions were integrated into the ranks of the Ultramarines and Imperial Fists respectively. However, this does not in itself mean they retained their gene seed stops, because the Imperium wiped out all trace of the 2nd and 11th Legions, destroyed their heraldry, destroyed their statues, wiped their names from history. It seems incredibly unlikely that they would allow the warriors of the 2nd and 11th Legions to retain their original gene seed stocks as well. So it seems more likely that upon being inducted into the ranks of the 7th and the 13th Legions, their progenoid glands would have been surgically removed and replaced with new ones. And there is evidence to support this possibility, because within the novel Pandorax, Epimetheus, who was one of the original founding members of the Grey Knights chapter, he was originally a Dark Angel and had his gene seed removed and replaced with entirely new sets of progenoid glands, which were derived from the Emperor's own genetic material rather than that of a Primarch. So there is evidence to support that possibility. Now, some people might turn around and say, but Soul Drinkers were an Imperial Fist Successor chapter who were confirmed to not share the same genetic lineage. That is true. That does not mean, however, that they are from one of the Lost Legions. There is a possibility that A, their gene seed stocks degrade to such an extreme degree that it was no longer recognizable as being descended from Imperial Fist stock, or B, they could have been descended from someone else. A possibility is that of the Alpha Legion, because the Soul Spear, part of his description sounds very similar to that of the Spear of Alfarius, i.e. the Pale Spear. What was the story about the Soul Spear? Dawn claimed it as a trophy from a battle upon a lifeless rock. What happened to the Pale Spear after Alfarius was killed? Would you say that Pluto was a lifeless rock? I'd certainly say it was a lifeless rock. The Soul Drinkers were also known to demonstrate high amounts of physical mutation within their gene seed. Which other Legion's gene seed is also known to develop spontaneous and rampant mutation? The Alpha Legions. So quite frankly, there's actually more evidence to support the idea of the Imperial Fist, the modern day Imperial Fist chapter, having Alpha Legion gene seed in it than there is Lost Legion gene seed, quite frankly. It's still purely conjecture and speculation, like all these theories are. So yeah, now you know the reason why I won't do an in-depth video on the Black Templars being descended from the Lost Legions video, because unfortunately it's just going to be mostly saying like, no, to be honest. Again, as I mentioned earlier, this is not a personal attack on the person who created this theory, it's just me explaining why I'm not going to do an in-depth theory video on this particular subject. So I hope you all understand in that regard. I mean, are my videos perfect? Are my theories perfect or watertight? Absolutely bloody not. I've made plenty of mistakes in the past, and quite frankly I will continue to do so in the future because I'm only human. I'm not perfect, no one's perfect. The only person who's perfect is the person who made the, Senator Armstrong boss music, that standing here, we realize, that song. They're the only person who's perfect, you know what I'm saying? But what do you think of the theory of the Black Templars being descended from one of the Lost Legions? Leave a comment below, and if you want to hear more unscripted rambling videos that are just me remembering facts off the top of my head, let me know in the comments below as well. Until next time, this has been Remleiz from 40k Theories, and we'll see you again soon. Bye bye!